Good morning, everyone. And new microphone system, so if we make any mistake, bear with us today. I'd like to welcome you to our Agriculture Rural Affairs Committee meeting, Thursday, February 6th. Just a statement. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendment listed item 2 to item 10 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submission today or written submission before the amendments are adopted by appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal if council does not adopt the amendment within 90 days of receipt of this application for zoning and 120 days for an official plan amendment. A comment sheet is available at the door for anyone wish to submit written comment on these amendments. And if anyone who has not registered yet would like to speak on any of the items, please pick up a form at the door and submit it to our clerk staff on the right. With that, we'll go on a consent agenda first, and declaration of interest. No, thank you. Confirmation of minute. Minute 10, minute of December 5th, 2019, the Agriculture Rural Affairs Committee, and minute 2, Planning Committee and Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee joint meeting on December 9. On the minute? Okay, thank you. Office of the City Clerk, Council and Committee Service. Item number 1, status update, Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending 27 January 2020. Is the item received? Received, thank you. Item number 2 is the zoning bylaw amendment, part of 6008 Fallowfield Road. Item number 1, the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council approve an amendment to a zoning bylaw 2008-250 for a part of 6008 Fallowfield Road for the purpose of rezoning the land from Agriculture Zone AG to Agriculture Subzone 5 AG5 to prohibit residential use on a retaining farmland as detailed in Document 2. And Document 2, the Item 2, that Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee approved the consultation details section of this report to be included as a part of this brief explanation. On the item 2, okay. Now, bear with me, there's many items are the same, but I'll read them just for the record. Item 3, zoning bylaw amendment 200 Gold Line Road, that the Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for part of 200 Golden Line Road for the purpose of rezoning the land from rural countryside zone RU to agriculture zone rural exception AG, so that the entire parcel will be consistently zoned in line with the official plan designation and the part of 200 Golden Line Road for the purpose of rezoning the land from rural countryside zone RU to agriculture subzone 4 AG4 to prohibit residential use on a retaining farmland as detailed in Document 2. Item number 2, that the Agricultural Welfare Committee approve the consultation details section of this report. On the item, Carrie, thank you. Item number 4 is zoning bylaw amendment, anomaly part of 3760 Granger Park Road. Item number 1, that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council approve an amendment to a zoning bylaw 2008-250 for the purpose of rezoning the entirety of 3760 Granger Park Road to rural countryside, rural exemption 353 RU and 353 RU to correct an error as detailed in Document 2, and that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee approve the consultation details section of this report be included as a part of the brief explanation. On the item? Okay. Item number 5 is zoning bylaw amendment, part of 8590 Marvelville Road. The Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee recommend council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for part of 8590 Marvel Road for the purpose of the rezoning a portion of the land from Agriculture Subzone 2 AG2 to Agriculture Subzone 6 AG6 to prohibit residential use on the retained farmland as detailed in document 2. Item number 2, that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee approve the consultation details section of this report be included as a part of the brief explanation on the item. Okay. Item number 6, zoning bylaw amendment 1892 York's Corner Road. Item number 1, that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend council approve an amendment to the zoning bylaw 2008-250 for part of 1892 York's Corners Road for the purpose of rezoning a portion of the land from Agriculture Zone AG to Agriculture Zone Subzone 5 AG5 to prohibit residential use on the retaining land and the rezoning that's severe from land from Agriculture Zone AG to Agriculture Zone Exception 1R AG 1R to permit reduced lot width of 10 meters as detailed in document 2. And item 2, the Agricultural Affairs Committee approved the consultation details section of this report. On the item?
Gary, we're getting there.
We're getting there, one more or two more perhaps. Item number 7, zoning bylaw amendment, part of 377 York's Corner Road. Item number 1, that Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for part of 3779 York's Corner for purpose of rezoning portion of the land from Agriculture Subzone 2 AG2 to Agriculture Subzone 6 AG6 to prohibit residential uses on the retaining farmland as detailed in document 2. Item number 2, the Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee approved the consultation details section of this report. On the item? Carried. Item number 8, zoning bylaw amendment, part of 6496 First Line Road. That the Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee recommend council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for part of 6496 First Line Road for the purpose of rezoning the land from Agriculture Zone Subzone 2 AG2 to Agriculture Subzone 6 AG6 to prohibit residential uses on the retaining farmland as detailed in document 2. And that Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee approve consultation details section of this report to be included as part of the brief explanation. On the item? Okay, Scott, we're done. Item number 9, zoning bylaw amendment 4837 Albion Road. Item number 1, the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 4837 Albion Road, Hard Rock, Ottawa Raceway and Casino to amend exception 528R and schedule S381 as detailed in document 4 and 5 to enable a revised layout at the expanded casino by A, permitting a new location for the proposed hotel, B, permitting outdoor commercial patio, minimum 6 meters wide, a drive side and front yard parking with a minimum of 3-meter landscape strip. C, clarifying the intent of the previous bylaw by removing text, and D, revising the holding provisions. And item number 2 is that the Agricultural Affairs Committee approve the consultation details section of this report. I believe we have a speaker in support, but before we go to the speaker, go to my colleague, Councillor DeRose, who has a motion to move on this item. Councillor DeRose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a motion, a friendly motion, actually, I already discussed it with the chair and Councillor Deans and of course our TMP team. And that's just a clarification that will not put Earl Armstrong to jump the queue. It's just in consideration for our master transportation team for next TMP. It reads, whereas supporting the Hard Rock Ottawa development at 4837 Albion Road is action of 2019-2022 term of council priority, and whereas the Hard Rock Ottawa Raceway and Casino expansion at 4837 Albion Road is located adjacent to the future extension of Earl Armstrong Road from Albion Road to Hawthorne Road as identified in the Transportation Master Plan's road network concept. Whereas the environment assessment for Earl Armstrong extension was completed in 2019 to protect the corridor for future road extension and respond effectively to the development application at 4837 Albion Road, whereas the implementation of Earl Armstrong extension is identified as a part of the TMP Affordable Road Network into 2031 and correspondingly has no funding allocated in the city long-range financial plan, and whereas road projects outside the city long-range financial plan are not eligible for development charges funding or front-ending agreement, therefore be resolved that Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend that Council direct staff in transportation services to review the implementation timing for Earl Armstrong extension from Albion Road to Bank Street and look for ways to advance this segment as part of the ongoing transportation master plan update. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Drews. On the motion?
Carried, yeah.
Carried. On the item, we have Mr. Cohen, but I believe you'll be happy if we carry this item, Mr. Cohen?
Very happy.
Thank you. And we'll be happy too, sir. So on the item, carry. Okay, as amended with the motion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Drews. Item number 10, Flu Island Special Study Area and Goulburn Wetland Official Plan Amendment and Zoning Bylaw Amendments. That the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, item 1, recommend that Council approve the proposed official plan amendment to remove policy 325 Flu Island Special Study Area, to remove the Flu Island Special Study Area overlay from Schedule A of the plan and to change the designated significant wetland boundaries of Goulburn Wetland Complex on Schedule A and B of the plan as shown in Document 1. Recommending that Council approve the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to change the zoning to reflect the revisions of the designated boundaries of the Goulburn Wetland Complex as shown in Document 2. So we do have a presentation from staff, and we have number of speakers on this item. And if anyone wishes to speak about this item, please, you can sign up with the clerk. So we'll hold item number 10. Item 11, Dillon, Wallace, and Johnston Municipal Drain, appointment of engineer. That the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend that Council appoint Mr. Andy Robinson, PN of Robinson Consultant, Inc., as an engineer of record to prepare a report under Section 78(1) of the Drainage Act to inform Council on the current status of the Dillon Wallace Municipal Drain and the Johnston Municipal Drain, and where one or more of the project listed under Section 78(1.1) as required for the better use, maintenance, or repair of the drainage works or the lands or roads. On the item 11, okay. Thank you very much. And we do have information distributed to you. Item A, 2019 Rural Ontario Municipal Association Roma Annual General Meeting and Annual Conference. So we have that information previously distributed. So we'll go to item 10, and I believe Mr. Herwire will introduce his team for the presentation.
I believe these are the new and improved mics today. So
Thank you. It's good to be here. We're here on a long-standing item and on the Fluellen Special Study Area and the Goulburn Wetland Complex, and we have proposed official plan and zoning amendments. And to my far right is Geraldine Wildman, who leads our Natural Systems Group, and Dr. Nick Stowe, who will be leading us through our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Herwire, members of the committee. The provincial policy statement requires municipalities to protect provincially significant wetlands from development. The province identifies provincially significant wetlands based on wetland evaluations. Most wetland evaluations are related to planning and development applications. We protect these PSWs, as they're known, by designating them as significant wetlands in our official plan and showing them on the schedules of the plan. The Goulburn Wetland Complex is a provincially significant complex that lies west of Stittsville. The word complex means that it consists of a number of non-contiguous wetland areas which nonetheless are connected or otherwise are functionally linked. It was first evaluated by the province in the 1990s. Its boundaries have been reevaluated several times since, most recently as part of the Fluellen Special Study Area process. Every reevaluation has identified more wetland area. The Fluellen Special Study Area policy was put in place to resolve concerns raised by landowners in the 2005-2006 reevaluation of the wetland complex, which added 20 new wetland areas to that complex. The landowners believed that the wetlands were not natural, but a result of factors such as the widening of Highway 7, quarry pumping, and inadequate ditch and drain maintenance. The Fluellen Special Study Area policy put in a four-step process for answering these questions and resolving the issues. It required a mineral aggregate review be completed for the whole city, which was a process ongoing at the time. It required a cumulative effects study of drainage changes in the area. It required a reevaluation of the wetland boundaries using the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System, and then it required the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, which is before you right now. So pardon me, page here. So this amendment will do three things. First, it will remove the Fluellen Special Study Overlay from Schedule A of the official plan. This is the rural land use schedule, and the associated official plan policies in section 3.2.5 of the official plan. It will designate the expanded boundaries of the provincially significant wetland as significant wetland on Schedule A of the official plan, and it will amend the zoning bylaw to reflect the new designations. Although most of the changes to the provincially significant wetland are additions, there are in fact some deletions to the wetland area as well. So I want to focus on 4 points in this presentation. First, that the Fluellen Special Study Area policy sets out the agreed process and requirements for resolution of the land use issues in this area. Second, I want to describe how the city has implemented this policy. Third, I want to illustrate the conclusion that the wetlands are naturally occurring. And fourth, I hope to show that adoption of the OPA and the zoning bylaw amendment is the best and most expeditious way for us to move forward. So first, the policy itself. There is a very long history to these issues, going back to the 1960s. You may hear delegations speak about drainage diversions, the Rural Summit, city landowner working groups, municipal drain applications, withdrawal of municipal drain applications. The point here is that the Fluellen Special Study Area policy established a process for bringing planning and land use decisions back into conformity with the provincial policy statement and the official plan. It was approved by council, by the province, and by the Ontario Municipal Board. It's a process that we followed and that we have completed. The policy, as I mentioned before, set out four requirements. First, we had to complete the Rural Review Mineral Resources Study, which was underway at the time, to determine if additional aggregate resources should be designated in the area. Robin Vandeland, one of the planners with the city, one of my colleagues, conducted that study, and the conclusion was no, the city already had an adequate supply of aggregate designated. We had to complete a cumulative effects study to determine if things like highway widening, quarry pumping, or some other human factor was responsible for the wetlands in the area. We completed that study, which concluded that the wetlands in the area are naturally occurring. We had to reevaluate the boundaries of the wetland in 2016. The year 2016 was significant because it was intended to allow legal drainage work undertaken in 2011 to have an impact, if indeed it was going to have an impact. And we had to bring forward this OPA and zoning bylaw amendment to establish the appropriate land uses. So we have fulfilled the requirements of this policy. So the main question here has always been, are these wetlands natural or not? The easiest way to illustrate this is to show the topography in the area. So what you see here is high-resolution topographic mapping derived from aerial laser range finding, what's called LiDAR. It shows the surface of the Earth as if we had removed all of the vegetation. So up in the upper right-hand corner, if my mouse works, you can see, for instance, the Carp landfill. You can see the bed of Highway 7. You can even see quarries and subdivisions. So it's very high-resolution topographic mapping. On the left is the topography without any lines. On the right are the boundaries of the provincially significant wetland as it has been mapped. What you can see is that these wetland areas on the right all fall within these basins in the topography. These are low areas where water naturally accumulates. So these are the places where we would expect wetlands normally to form. Although it's not quite as clear, the mapping also shows that there is very little grade across the area from north to south, which means that these low-lying basins are very, very difficult to drain. And as I said, those are the conditions under which you would expect wetlands to form. The other natural factor that has played a role in the wetlands in this area, formation of wetlands, is the return of beavers to the landscape. These are aerial photographs from the most controversial portion of the Goulburn Wetland Complex, the so-called diversion between Flowing Creek and the Hobbs Drain. On the left is a photograph from 1976. On the right is a photograph from 1999. As you can see, in 1976, the wetlands are much less extensive, and there's very limited evidence of beavers. If you look down at this area, for example, you can see that that appears to be mainly agricultural land or recently abandoned agricultural land rather than wetland. If you look at it in 1999, however, you will see that it is now covered with wetland. The difference here is that in 1976, there were very few beavers on the landscape. If you know your history, beavers were basically trapped out of the Ottawa Valley almost 250 years ago. However, by 1999, they had recolonized the area. And you can see their evidence in the photography in the 1999 photograph. At the very top, for example, along the creek, you can see 3 new beaver dams and the resulting beaver ponds. If you follow the line of Flowing Creek, which is a bit difficult to see, but it comes down here and flows along this area here, you can see that there's a whole chain of beaver ponds and beaver dams in here. This wetland area in the center is bounded by a very, very large beaver dam. So recolonization of the area by beavers helped to reestablish wetlands that would have been present on the pre-settlement landscape prior to the trapping out of beavers. This is a natural process. Should also note that in 1999, when wetlands were at their maximum across the area, Highway 7 had not yet been widened, and the big quarries, the big Kavanaugh and Tomlinson quarries, had not yet been started. So this water is not as a result of the widening of Highway 7 or pumping from those quarries. The one human factor that's been important in the area is agriculture, because farming can change conditions. Some of the wetlands in the area are very marginal. If you clear the vegetation, the soil warms up earlier in the year, the soil gets hotter, the land dries out more quickly, and you're less likely to have the formation of wetlands. So we're looking here at an area that is south of Llewellyn Road and west of Conley, along the Hobbs Drain. The map shows in red 2005-2006 wetland boundary, and then in yellow the current provincially significant wetland boundary. What you can see here is that in 1976, along the bottom half of the photograph, most of this land was in agricultural production or just recently abandoned agricultural land. There's a little bit of shrub growth beginning to happen in the center part of this. Well, that's interesting. Oh, okay. There we go. Okay. It's just like me, it takes a little pause now and then. So in 1999, however, these lands had been abandoned as agriculture. They're no longer being farmed. The vegetation had grown back up, and as a result, you see the difference in color between this area here and this area up here. These areas have become much, much wetter, and in fact now qualify as wetland. 2014, the owner of this property went back in, cleared the vegetation, it repaired the ditches in the area, and put that land back into agricultural production. And consequently, when it was mapped in 2000 and whatever the year it was, by Dillon, the most recent study, 2016, it was left out of the provincially significant wetland complex. So farming can make a difference, and when someone says that this can't possibly be wetland because my father, grandfather, great-grandfather farmed potatoes on it, well, in fact, they may have farmed potatoes on it, but if it has not been in agricultural production since, it's very likely returned to a wetland condition. The other point I want to make here is that the clearing of this land, again, and putting it back into agricultural production, is allowed under the wetland policies. Wetland policies say that existing agricultural uses can continue, and since this land was in production previously and has just been restored, we consider that to be existing agricultural use, and so it is permitted under the policies. So this official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment is important for getting us out of our current planning and regulatory limbo. Currently, we have areas designated as rural or other land use in Schedule A of the official plan, but which are in fact identified as provincially significant wetland by the province. This is a situation that leads to confusion. Someone, for example, might purchase a property designated general rural, thinking that they can develop it or sever it, and yet when they come in to the city for an application, we advise them that it is provincially significant wetland, and in fact, they can't do so. If council in the future were to vote to expand the urban boundary, one of the things we're looking at in the official plan review, again, the current situation creates confusion and uncertainty about which lands might qualify for inclusion in the urban boundary and which lands might not. We could have a property that has no significant wetland designation on it, but which in fact has provincially significant wetland, and so staff would have to recommend against including it. This is a confusion we probably don't need in a process that is already likely to be very complicated. We have some provincially significant wetlands that are regulated and some that are not, sometimes within the same jurisdiction, within the jurisdiction of the same conservation authority. So the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, for example, only regulates provincially significant wetlands that are designated in our official plan. That leaves non-designated wetlands, provincially significant wetlands, open to drainage. So the simplest and quickest way to resolve these problems is to approve the recommendation for the official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment and return to our normal planning processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stoll and Mr. Herwire. My colleague Scott Moffett have a motion to move, so for this, the benefit of the speaker, I have a copy, Scott. Benefit of the speaker, they can speak on both the report and the motion from Councillor Moffett. So we'll go to Councillor Moffett to introduce his motion.
Thank you. We have a, Nick, if you don't mind, I know you had the map, the attached map for my motion that you can put on the screen.
Just trying to find that right now.
No worries. So just to introduce it, if people, some people in this room will recall, this dates back to 2005 as a result of a development application along Fluellen Road and the need for an environmental impact statement. That environmental impact statement turned into the Goulburn Wetland Complexing. And fast forward to 2009 and an OMB decision to review wetlands in the area, to provide further review and to provide landowners an opportunity to address that. There was the Fluellen Special Study Area that was created. And that special study area had a specific boundary. So between 2009 and 2016, there was some activities in the area. One was unfortunately a failed municipal drainage application, but also opportunities by landowners to make changes to their property to see if they could improve drainage in the property and then to come back and reevaluate. So landowners were given that opportunity. 2016, Dillon Consulting was brought in to update the mapping, to go back and review the mapping with the changes, and some changes were identified in the Fluellen Special Study Area map outline. However, Dillon Consulting went far beyond the limits of that Fluellen Special Study Area. And I understand why they did it, but from a landowner's perspective, from a 2009 OMB decision perspective, this was not consistent with what residents had anticipated. So reaching as far north as West Carleton, north of Highway 7, was not what was expected. So what I'd like to do here today, and I'll read the motion in a second, but it's to bring us back to where we anticipated we were in the first place, which is the 2009 Fluellen Special Study Area boundaries, and to limit the rezoning to only within that designated area. It's still impactful, there's no question. I know I have residents in that area that are still going to be impacted by this. It doesn't actually address their concerns, but it brings us back to a point where I feel comfortable that we're being consistent with what we said over 10 years ago, before my time. So whereas the report ACS 2020 PIE EDP 003 details the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for the Fluellen Special Study Area, policy 3.2.5 of the OP, and the provincially significant Goulburn Wetland Complex. And whereas the report recommends approval of the special study area policies and recommends designation and zoning of the expanded wetland boundaries. And whereas there is an interest to limit the changes to the significant wetland boundaries on Schedule A of the OP to the areas within this Fluellen Special Study Area, and by interest, I mean my interest. Therefore, be it resolved that the Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee recommend that Council replace Fluellen Maps A to I, found in Document 2, and OPA Schedule 1A, 1B, and 1C, found in Document 1, with the attached replacement maps. Now, for our purposes, we have a series of maps attached to this motion. They are on the screen. So you can see many in this room will be familiar with that outline. That's the outline that we all dealt with back in the last decade. Actually, that's 2 decades ago. So this has been a long process, as Mr. Stowe mentioned. So I'm just trying to provide some continuity to what we had originally, and that's the intent of this motion. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Moffett, for your motion. Now we go to a public delegation and then question to staff, and then we'll come back to the motion. But we'll start first with delegation. Robin Tilkman. Again, if someone wishes to speak, has not registered yet, please register with the clerk. And ma'am, you have 5 minutes to address the committee. Just turn your mic on, please.
So much. Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Robin Tilgner, and I am the joint owner with my husband, Imo, of just under 100 acres extending from Fluellen Road on the north to Fallowfield Road on the south. My husband's family came here as sponsored refugees from post-war Europe in the 1950s. Through hard work, they built up a productive dairy farm which sustained the family and my mother-in-law until her death several years ago. The land we own is the remaining portion of that farm. My husband's focus on maintaining a career as a professional engineer and also in maintaining arable land led us to choose the rehabilitation of the property. Under the direction of the Ministry of Natural Resources, some 60,000 pine trees were planted, as well as undertaking the ongoing restoration of the deciduous tree canopy. We chose to leave open hay-producing meadows, which have provided ample absorbency for rain runoff. As a consequence, we provide habitat for an increasing variety of wildlife species, and we do not allow hunting. The only visible standing water is a small pond dug at the suggestion of the MNR and our insurance providers for fire protection. We were notified initially by letter that rezoning changes were happening, and when the first 16 or so acres along the front of our property were marked as possible wetland, we did not protest. That seemed a reasonable buffer against an increasing amount of water to the north. Since then, largely silence. We get a tax bill every year, but certainly have had no other regular communication from the city concerning our property since 2016. We attended relevant meetings thanks to notification from our neighbors. With the small and imprecise maps available to us, we can now see that there seems to be an almost 50% increase of proposed wetland from the original plan. Much of that is a gravel ridge which winds its way through the whole property and includes our house, septic system, driveway, hydro lines, and thousands of trees, those carefully chosen by the MNR as suitable planting on a gravel bed. We are classed as an agricultural operation. What happens now? I wonder how the city expects us to continue. I have to tell you that I am very frightened about our future. We can get no answers. How are we meant to operate and harvest, cut our own wood, look after the woodlots properly, replace harvested trees, add a needed machine shop, all the while knowing our estate planning has been decimated? Can any of you imagine a rezoning to your home that resulted in a 2/3 drop in its value without any compensation? We are conservationists, striving to maintain and encourage a balanced rural ecosystem, and brokenhearted that our choices seem to have been stripped away. Not once has our councillor or his staff reached out to us to see if we had any questions or if we needed information. No one from Dillon has been in communication with us since 2016. Someone just extended lines on a map. Our local environmentalists and our councillors need to know that the maps across which they write wetlands are real properties owned by real people, people who had hopes for the future, people who loved the conservation work they were doing because they love their land. I am one of those people, and I am sitting right here, right in front of you, and I am terrified. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. My husband's family was given refuge in Canada when they fled post-war chaos and their property was taken from them. No choices were left to them. Our family of 5 children and 10 grandchildren, now with deep roots in the area, are watching their father and grandfather appear to once more lose his freedom of choice, the use of and enjoyment of his home and his life's work, all because someone who drew lines on a map could not seem to clearly differentiate between a wetland and thousands of trees on a gravel ridge. We believe this to be a matter of compensation from the City of Ottawa for lost property value due to a change in zoning, and we intend to pursue that course of action. In closing, I will state the action item arising from these comments. We are requesting that a boundary review of the wetland parameters for the east half, Lot 17, Concession 8, be undertaken, and that those boundaries be reduced in size. Thank you for your time this morning.
Wow, you did it less than 20 seconds left. Thank you very much. Before you leave and before I ask my colleague if they have any question for the presenter, Mr. Stoll, can you clarify something we heard from the presenter about be able to continue the farming practice on the land? Can you explain that?
Yes, Chair. The wetland policies in the official plan do not affect ongoing existing uses of the land. They only come into effect if there is a development application for the property that would change those land uses.
Is that clarified? Or, go ahead, ask.
Yeah, I wanted to the delegate, thank you, clarification. Is the concern about being able to continue the existing agricultural farming uses, or is the concern about future real estate value if you ever wanted to sell the property?
Well,
notwithstanding your concerns about the gravel ridge, are they just separate? I just want to make sure that as a committee, we understand your particular concern about the future of your property.
Well, there are certainly 2 items here because there's a communication issue because we don't, it's getting information on the use of the property. Certainly, one hears that it's very difficult to modify anything, to put up a building to help with the operation. We hear stories about taking soil away, bringing soil. So that communication is lacking, so we don't know where to go for answers. In terms of, certainly all of us, in terms of estate planning, need to look at that, and if the land is valued at a certain amount previous to this, yeah, that is always a concern. I'm sure it's a concern for every homeowner that this is an issue, but to lose the ability to maintain that agricultural operation, to put up a small building, to do the things we need to do, that's a huge concern. And we honestly do not know where to go for consistent information because, again, we're city of Ottawa, and then there's provincial regulations if it's a provincial wetland. So we desperately need help knowing how to proceed. And so certainly seeing our boundaries of the wetland increase to take in land that, yeah, I just can't see it as a wetland. But, you know, I realize there are 4 different designations for wetland by definition, but.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. Can I, Mr. Chair, quickly ask staff, would city staff be a starting point if residents have questions? Like, I appreciate that. Do they go to the city? Do they go to the province? Do they go to Mississippi Valley? Is the city a logical starting point? Can they contact Dr. Stowe, for example, and you could triage those requests to the appropriate body based on what they're asking? Is that an appropriate route for residents with further questions?
Absolutely, that's my role at the city, to field questions like that, to refer people to other resources if I don't have the answers for them. We have, since 2016, maintained a web page with outlining the process and the implications of the Pulam Special Study Area process and the wetland reevaluation, that website was included in the notice that we sent out in 2016 to try and make sure that people had current information as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I might comment, I think that is, it's a difficult situation getting information if one doesn't belong to a landowner's group. And we may have fallen through the cracks, but I promise you that the letters and information have not come through to us. And yes, one can do research, but there's no replacement for speaking to someone who really knows who to connect with. It's the free flow of information would be very reassuring.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Gower. Councillor Meehan?
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Stowe, can I just ask a question? Before, I understand that our presenter here today had no problem with the boundaries as they were
initial
delineated
ones,
in 2016. How did you expand, what methodology did you use in order to expand those boundaries? Did you walk? Did you go around and see the properties that were going to be included? Or how did you decide what was going to be included in that new wetland boundary?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the city did not conduct the wetland evaluation itself. We hired a consultant, Dillon Consulting, to do the wetland evaluation on our behalf, and Dillon submitted those results directly to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry for their review and confirmation or not. So it was not the city that was conducting the wetland evaluation, it was the consultant on our behalf. They followed the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System, which is a provincially approved system for identifying and evaluating wetlands. And they followed the methodology in that system for evaluating and identifying the boundaries of those wetlands. And then the ministry reviewed that and signed off.
And how did he decide?
Typically, it's done on the basis of vegetation. So you sometimes get into soils, but basically it is the vegetation wetland vegetation or not wetland vegetation? And there are lists of species that grow in wetlands and species that do not grow in wetlands. And
But there's a lot of things can differentiate it.
Councillor Meehan, can we please save the question to staff after? So
I'm
we
sorry.
want to hear from the delegate first. So we have don't go, ma'am. We have a question from Councillor Moffat. Councillor Moffat?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. So just to look at your property, obviously, as you know, the front right portion, so the eastern portion down your laneway has always been in the floodplain, correct?
It's scrubland.
No, but it's just, I'm just saying, it's floodplain lands, right? So it's regulated by that floodplain.
Yes, the first few
And then-
acres, I suppose, would be.
And then
yeah.
this would impact the west side of your laneway.
This would impact, and there's a buffer, yes, for about 120 meters but the way the curve was, it takes in the building.
That's
and
right, the back, yeah.
So,
So you still have, I know that just from a future use, obviously in that area in Goulburn, rural Goulburn, the development potential is limited as is. You do have a right to severance. It would appear that you have not taken that right since 2003, so you'd still have the right to 2 severances, which it looks like you could obtain at the rear of your property.
okay,
And then you still have about 18 to 20 hectares outside of any sort of designated boundary. From that perspective, you could still build out buildings. I mean, it'd be off of I wouldn't say a considerable distance from the outbuildings that you already have at the back of toward the middle of the property. But there is still, I think Nick can probably assist more, and I know our planning staff would be able to assist
Okay.
more too. If that was something you're interested in doing, if you were looking at building more buildings on the site for the purposes of farming,
Yeah.
our staff can certainly help you through that process to
Okay.
explain size and where
Yeah.
you could be.
Yeah.
You do have, I'll admit that some properties in this area will not be able to do anything as a result of this.
Okay.
You still have that, over half of your land that is outside of that zone, which is somewhat of a benefit, so you do get the negative impact on one hand, but there is still some land that you have that could be used for that, so just important to know. And we could discuss further, again, Nick, someone in our planning department. So Nick's on the policy
Okay.
side of our planning department, and then we have
Okay.
the implementers, the folks that would review applications.
Of course, the primary goal here is to be able to continue our operation, continue what we're doing.
Yes.
Because, as I said, we're taxed as agricultural land, and in a form of production.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to take that away. And I know,
No.
as you've seen in the last few years, people have come in and actually brought their land back to agricultural use.
Oh, yeah,
And that's
yeah,
been
yeah.
fully permitted, so.
And we chose not to
Yeah.
strip the trees and the
No,
rest
fair
of it.
enough, yeah.
The other implication, of course, is, and I haven't seen anything about this, is in a sense, it's privately owned land, we're donating it because it can't be used for anything else. The question of compensation. I mean, I haven't seen that anywhere about tax reduction or, you know, it's
There
out of the
is-
goodness of our hearts, you know, we're
There is
doing
a
this
tax
thing.
reduction ability through the province for PSWs, if I'm not mistaken. Nick, can you correct me on that?
That's correct. You can apply to the province to have your taxes on the provincially significant wetland portion of your property forgiven.
That's right, that's right. So there is
Okay,
that person.
okay.
That might be a
That's
further
very
conversation as
useful
well.
to know,
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
yeah.
All right, thank
I
you.
All
think
right.
also very useful, you should take Nick's card and keep it with you. So if you have any question, by all means.
Oh, yes, please.
All right. Any other question to the delegate? No? Okay, thank you very
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mike Wesley. Mr. Wesley, you're here. Good morning, Mr. Wesley.
Mr. Chair and councillors,
I
thank you.
don't have to remind you about the 5 minutes. I'm sure you've been around us a long time, just like a Groundhog Days. Keep coming.
I might need a minute, but
All right, sir. Thank you.
good morning, councillors. I'm Mike Wesley, the Goulburn Landowners Group, Inc., as you say. My wife and I have lived at 7176 Llewellyn Road for the past 50 years plus. We had been designated wetlands, got that removed. I used to travel the unopened road allowance to Goulburn Municipal Dump on Fernbank Road. By 1987, you needed a boat. 1987, I had a petition signed to have the Hubs Municipal Drain Extension created to get rid of water directed to our area from the north that had no outlet. Same time, a 7-foot by 50-foot culvert was installed under Fernbank Road. The road was also raised to stop flooding of it. That's to the north of us. All water through this huge culvert was being dumped onto the Crothager property without their consent to Flowing Creek. Engineers for the Hobbs extension identified Flowing Creek as obstructed. A memo from Rita Valley and the MOE, February 5th, 01, approved an application for Tomlinson of 7,776,000 liters a day. Don McIver asks Bruce Reed if the Jock River could handle all of this extra water. Bruce Reed said it could handle 10 of those quarries with no flood damage at the Richmond or significant concerns up to the Shea Road, which was a municipal drain. We have no reliable information from Shea Road to the dewatering quarry. Bruce Reed says it would be advisable for the Ministry of the Environment to require the applicant to provide confirmation from the drainage superintendent that the system has capacity to accept the additional flows. Also, the dewatering applicant is obliged in common law to not interfere with the drainage of his downstream neighbors' lands and to produce signed consent forms from the downstream riparian landowners to confirm that they have no objection to the augmented flows. Drainage Act. Drainage improvements might be needed to convey the pumped water across another property owner's land. Dibley have already been pumping water along the north side of the Goulburn Rail Trail, draining into Flowing Creek with no permit. They're applying for one at that time, Golder Associates. Pumping from several quarries adds to excessive runoff. Other developments, such as widening of Highway 7, will exacerbate existing flooding problems. Quote notes, surface water will be discharged into the wetland and drain into the Goulburn Creek. The additional water should expand the wetland and increase the flow in the creek. Forest cover will be lost. Don McIver, RVCA. Water flow from the quarries at 17 liters a second to 152 liters a second. Water level likely to increase as well from 0.5 to 1 meter. Picture of water flowing over oh yeah, I have a picture of the water flowing over the Trans-Canada Trail. Interviews with several community members. Who? Annie Robinson, consultants, water flow rate at Connolly and Fluellen Road. The original drainage to Connolly Road was 8 liters a second. With the illegal diversion from Flowing Creek, it now is 82.5 liters a second. Quarry pumping accounts for 16% of the water flow. Pumped discharge from quarries in the area does contribute to the persistent base flow that is observed along Connolly Road and Flowing Creek. Restoration of original drainage patterns will reduce both peak flows and base flow along Connolly Road. I had a petition signed by 20 landowners to get the Flowing Creek municipal drain started to provide an outlet for all this water dumped there. It failed due to runaway costs. I was an active member of the Stittsville Snowmobile Association for about 30 years. I groomed trails for 17 of those years from my home and saw lots of drain changes. One of our trails ran from Dwyer Hill Road along the north side of the rail line to Abbott Street. A real pretty trail winding through lush bush area, now a quarry and flooded. Have maps of the trails available. Have pictures of water going over the rail bed. I do not agree with the Dillon's cumulative report. You don't flood private property, then designate them PSW. You provide water outlet first.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up, Mike. Because,
Yeah, just about done here. Wetlands in the area are not all natural. They are not long-standing features. They are expanding due to poor drainage. Quarry discharge does increase wetlands. Ditch maintenance is a problem.
okay.
5 working quarries discharge to water courses that ultimately discharge to the Jock. Tomlinson and Dibley Bell discharge to provincially significant wetland that serves as headwaters for Flowing Creek. Just one paragraph left. Because of quarry water discharge, deviation from some parameters was quite large, indicating that concentrations in the effluent from all quarries, the Hobbs Drain and Flowing Creek, can be extremely variable.
Thank you, Mr. Weston. Any question for the delegate? See none. Thank you very much, Mr. Wesley. Our next speaker is Mr. McRae. Mr. McRae, are you in the audience? Oh, yes. I know you did send us an email, I think, around 3 o'clock this morning at 3 a.m. And
yeah, that was fun.
yeah, that was fun. I think we call it mental health now because we're supposed to shut off our system during the night, but I happen to have it open. So, but welcome to the committee, sir. You have 5 minutes to address the committee, and I believe the clerk sent your email around. Consider you send them yourself as well. So
Right.
Okay, go ahead with your 5 minutes.
Good morning. I've been working on the proper identification and classification of parts of the provincially significant Goulburn wetland complex for over the past 22 years, since the time that the Amber Lakes subdivision in Stittsville was proposed. And I've carried out a lot of different work, gone to the Ontario Municipal Board on some occasions, submitted Part 2 order request under the Environmental Assessment Act in regards to the city's early 2000s extension of the Rothburn Road between Hazeldean Road and the old part of Rothburn Road, which was to go through part of the provincially significant Goulburn wetland complex, and the city study didn't make any mention of any wetland. But as a result of the bump-up request from myself and 2 others, the city had to do wetland evaluation work, which resulted in some landowners going out and destroying part of the wetland, which has been ongoing destruction since then. The proposed official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments, I generally support. They've been a very, very long time coming. I very strongly oppose Councillor Moffat's suggestion of limiting the recognition of the wetlands to just the Fluellen Special Study Area. I would point out that there is a part of the staff report that refers to the wetland that, let's see, where was it? That is not to be limited to a certain area, that it's not based just on strictly a geographic point here, a geographic point there. It's based upon ecological parameters. So you can't just have it limited to within the lines of the Fluellen Special Study Area. The wetland has to be looked at as a whole. Now, another part which I refer to in my email that I sent you is that there's a number of unevaluated wetlands indicated on both the city's Geo-Ottawa mapping website and also on the OM&RF's Natural Heritage Information Center mapping. Now, I don't know whether Dillon Consulting looked at those unevaluated wetlands when they did their evaluation work back in 2016 or not. But if the wetland, the Goulburn Wetlands Complex, if it's to be properly and fully, completely evaluated, those unevaluated wetlands should also be looked at by a professional wetland evaluator. So I indicated the question in my email that if Dillon looked at those and decided that they don't qualify to be added to the wetland complex, then fine. If they, however, did not look at those unevaluated wetlands and determine whether or not they should be part of the Goulburn Wetland Complex, then they should be hired back to do so. Now, there was also a reference in the city staff report about if the city doesn't adopt these amendments, that there's no right of appeal. I don't understand that. I appealed to the OMB back in 2010 when the city didn't move forward with recognizing the wetlands that Ron Hauser identified back in 2004.
Your time is up, Mr. McRae, but if you can wrap up your question.
So
Just wrap up.
if necessary, I don't accept the premise that this cannot be appealed to the local planning appeal tribunal. And if I deem it appropriate, I will do so.
Okay, so we'll take that question to staff, and they can answer that when we start questioning staff. Is that correct? Okay, any question to the delegate? No? Thank you very much, Mr. McRae. Our next speaker is Ursula and Mr. Nasrallah, Matt Nasrallah. Are they both speaking? Are you both speaking, Mr. Nasrallah? So each one will have 5 minutes?
Are they together?
What's that?
Are they together?
They're both registered.
Split together.
Yeah. They both together.
You're one delegation, right?
Oh, one delegate, okay.
Yes, we're one delegation, but if we could maybe have 6 minutes, we will not.
Well,
Go
okay.
ahead, Mr.
well,
You gotta wrap up now.
Mr. Nasrallah speaks fast, so let's hear from him.
Mr. Chair, members of council, thank you. Representing the Kavanaugh family of companies today regarding our parcel of land, combined over 180 hectares approximately of land in this affected by this Llewellyn Special Study Area. Our concern from the outset of this entire process has been primarily procedural. We appreciate Councillor Moffat's motion as it's consistent with what our expectation has been since entering into a legal settlement with the City of Ottawa to release our appeal of OPA 76 to allow this land to be brought in under the estate lot moratorium with certain expectations of wetland pre-existing on the site. The scope creep of the Llewellyn Special Study Area was always a concern of ours in terms of how the public consultation was conducted. I will defer to my friend and our counsel, legal counsel Ursula Mullins, for the further details. She's been on this file since its infancy when my hair was all brown.
Yes, so my involvement in the Llewellyn Special Study Area and the Goulburn Wetlands does start back in when I started at Solways in 2000, so I do have a long history on this file professionally. You know, the Llewellyn Special Study Area, as identified by Councillor Moffat, thank you, was very specific in terms of its scope, and that was accepted, and that came out of the 2011 Ontario Municipal Board decision. You know, since then, there was the cumulative effect study, which Kavanaugh continues to dispute the conclusions of. We have retained experts in the fields, and those studies are close to conclusion that we will be bringing forward in regards to that, including the findings that this is flat topography. It's not in our submission, but that's a discussion for another day. Now, in regards to the Dillon study, wetlands are open files, and that's the opinion of the province. So new information may be brought forward to them in terms of designation and what the appropriate designation is. And, you know, that's a separate process from the city and the official plan amendments and the zoning bylaws that are before you. But I think that's an important fact just to bring forward so people in the room do know that. We do support Councillor Moffat's motion in regards to this matter. And, you know, we're here if you have any questions for us.
That was great. Any question for both delegates? No? Well, thank you very much, Ursula and Mr. Nasrallah, for your presentation. Our next speaker is Anne McMillan. And next after Anne is Shirley Dolan. And if anybody else wish to speak, to sign up, please.
Thank you. Hello, I'm one of the landowners that's going to be affected by this, and a small group of us got together about a year ago to actually organize our own expert special study of the extent of the wetland between Fallowfield Road and Mansfield. We actually enlisted a qualified evaluator who submitted a report earlier this fall, and who changed the wetland boundaries fairly significantly in the areas that she looked at by taking pictures, walking the property, and taking a really on-the-ground look. The communication around this whole issue has been really awful. I want to support what was said by Robin in an earlier conversation. I'm a person who bought a 10-acre parcel of land on Fallowfield Road 22 years ago. I recognized myself that it was wetland and that it should be conserved, and have made, you know, have kept the land pristine, basically, not developed it, allowed it to recover from the ice storm damage that was very significant, cleared some of the deadfall, and left it to recover. I'm a bit alarmed at the kind of approach that gets taken here. The land that I own is in significant transition. It may be climate change, I don't know what it is, but the land is actually drying up in contrast to some of the areas in other parts of the wetland. I think that, you know, I understand the need for the city to be active in putting in bylaws and this and that. I do think there needs to be a recognition that provincially this is a changing and an evolving wetland, and it would be helpful if there was some process put in place for continual reevaluation of the zoning in the context of what is going to happen over this area. I mean, you're seeing a significant number of landowners who are concerned. You're seeing a significant number of presentations on this, in spite of the fact that there have been studies up the yin-yang over a period of a couple of decades. I think you guys have to bite the bullet and basically say that you're not going to be able to really have an end to this issue because, you know, people are going to continue to quantify the changes that happen to this wetland. It's a significant wetland. It's an area of interest. Somehow, the planning process is going to have to encapsulate a component of change and have some kind of a continual evaluation process in place in order to protect this wetland appropriately and to allay the fears of the landowners in terms of the planning process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure any question for you. Can you please have a seat? I have a question from Councillor Meehan for you.
Yes. Thank you. Are you affected by the boundary changes, or are you in a better position because of the amendment that was introduced today?
It's almost the same. The extent of the wetland has been reduced slightly by this change, and yes, my property's drying up. So
you think eventually you will, maybe the designation of wetland will not apply to your property just because of what's happening environmentally?
it's very hard to say. My neighbor is making significant modifications to his land level and the flow in the area. There appears to be no regulations in place to stop him from doing this, and I believe that putting in, you know, hundreds and hundreds of loads of topsoil is preventing the flow from his place onto my place, and therefore my wetland is drying up. But, you know, these are the kinds of significant changes that take place and that aren't really part of this at all.
Thank you. And I think your suggestion bears some merit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one more question, please, from Councillor Moffat.
So you mentioned, so I see your property now, you're right next to the Equestrian Farm.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So you said you had a wetland evaluator on your property?
Yes.
With whatever they came up with, did they submit that to MNR for their?
Yes, they did.
Okay, because that's really the process here. We're kind of a ludicrous rubber stamp in this process. It's actually quite frustrating, and I would prefer not to do this at all.
Right.
To be perfectly honest, this is a matter of wetland evaluations were done. They were submitted to the MNR. The MNR recognized them, and we're supposed to follow suit with the zoning. It's much like when a landfill gets approved. We have no say in it, but we're supposed to zone it in the end. So if I had my way, I would just not do any of this, and I would just let the province, if you want to zone this, then you zone it. You have full right to do it. So, but I know there is a process. I'm not in your. I'll ask Nick afterwards. But yeah, so there is a question I have for Nick afterwards, stemming from what your comment is. But I'll do that at the end.
May I just say that, you know, I think we have a group of, I would say, conscientious landholders who want to manage their land appropriately, and we have been a little frustrated in terms of getting our questions answered and getting, you know, clarity with all of this. The fact that I owned my land for 22 years and I never had any contact with anybody until my neighbor came to me and asked me if I wanted to participate in a fairly expensive and significant study, which we've now presented, you know, pro bono for the ministry. You know, it was thousands of dollars we as landholders spent to actually do our own expert evaluation. So the issue of monetary whatever is one that's going to be eventually on the plate.
Yeah, the interesting thing is the MNR doesn't actually evaluate wetlands anymore. They just wait for other people to do it and submit it to them.
Right.
They're not very proactive. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Ms. Dolan? Good morning, Ms. Dolan.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and councillors. I'll be brief. I just want to talk a little bit about process. And I did hear from a number of property owners that although they were affected by the designations, that they didn't receive a letter. So I don't know what the process is. I don't know if letters were sent to some people, not sent to others. I don't know. I know there's information on the website, but that's kind of, if you're thinking about it, maybe you'll go and visit that. This has been a very long process, and there are a lot of people that just don't go to the website to see what's going on. The other option I know is to sign up for notifications, and that's just foreign to a lot of people. So I appreciate the efforts that are taken by the city to let people know, but I guess I'm just saying it's not enough. And if you can do more, that would be very helpful. The other thing I appreciate is the city letting the Carleton landowners know about these things, because we do have an email list. We do send out notifications to let people know this is happening, that there is a meeting and you should be going and why you should be going. So we will continue to do that, but not all landowners are part of our group. The other thing I'd like to mention is the quality of the maps. It was mentioned that some people have had their own experts, consultants come on their land and do an evaluation. But in the end, with the maps that were available, they couldn't really tell, even though they had submitted the results from their own studies, whether or not there was any change. I know of at least one landowner where their consultant had disputed some of the wetland designation, but I think to this day they're not really clear whether that's in or that's out. So I'm not sure whether or not some improvements can be made to that as well. The other thing I'd like to mention is drainage. The province right now, I know, is looking at the Drainage Act. The Carleton landowners for sure will be communicating with the province to see if changes can be made. There's always a conflict between the Conservation Authorities Act and the Drainage Act, and they don't work well together. There has to be some way where those two can work well, where one does not trump the other. We have heard people talking about the flooding, and I think there needs to be more focus on drainage as well as on designation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any question for Ms. Dolan? No? Ms. Dolan, I have a question for you. So were you in the room when Councillor Moffat introduced his motion?
Yes.
Okay. So, and what's your thought on that motion?
I neither support nor oppose.
Okay, thank you.
That's fine.
So that's okay. I think we can, Scott can suck her up if you have to. Okay, so we have a question for staff. So we start with Councillor DeRose. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine is very brief. I just thank you for the presenters. I know that something came to the surface of that, and I have a question for Nick probably and his team. On the communication piece, can you give this committee a little bit briefing on how you did your communication? Because we heard from multiple presenters that the information was not well presented to them and they have to hear it from their neighbors or from other sources. And moving forward will be probably this committee recommended maybe to improve those communication with the residents specifically that they're impacted directly with this? Do you have a mailing list? Can you just give us a couple, take us through the process, how you did it, if you don't mind?
Yes, Councillor, I'd be pleased to. We have been doing using mail drops and registered mail, as well as our website to try and communicate with landowners. So, for example, prior to the 2016 public meeting, where we presented the results of the cumulative effects study and announced that we were moving ahead with the wetland evaluation, we did a mail drop in the area to notify landowners. When the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry made a decision on the boundaries of the wetland, we did another mail drop. When the notices, so that was 2016, and then in 2018, when we actually initiated the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, we sent out letters to landowners within the area that was to be affected. If I recall, those were registered letters. We've been as proactive as we can be in trying to reach landowners. We have gone through local community associations, through the Goulburn Landowners Association as well, and we have been maintaining the website. We always look for ways that we can improve our communications, because we know that inevitably we don't reach someone.
Well, probably you won't have answer for me, but I would really recommend strongly that from what we heard from the presenter, maybe if you collect back on the list, because the presenter said that they last received a letter in 2016 on an update, so maybe we can probably improve our communication a little bit more and gather them all, stream them all together to making sure the resident, and maybe also you can reach to the councillor, because he also put newsletter out in his information.
Yes.
Just a little bit, I'm not criticizing, I'm just trying to make sure that we have a better way of communicating to our community, to residents, so making sure that they are getting the update that they need, and they are getting the answers that actually, if not getting the answers, actually make them more frustrated. So let's beat that and making sure that we are delivering our messages and update to the resident properly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Duluth, Councillor Gower, and then Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been looking forward to this report coming to committee and council for a while. I started looking into this as a journalist back in 2014, and I've met with Mr. Wesley, I've met with Mr. McRae, a number of the other landowners, and I've attended a few of Dr. Stowe's presentations. And I think Goulburn Wetland Complex, that word complex is probably a good way to explain this process over the last 15 years. I had a few questions, because I've had some questions from landowners over the past week or so, I guess trying to separate myth from fact or clear up some misconceptions. One of the things that I was asked is, does the city have a target quota for the number of, for wetland area? Are we required by the province to have a certain target number of hectares of wetlands within the city of Ottawa?
No, Councillor, we do not.
And is there any requirement if wetlands are developed by builders in one part of the city? Do we have to have a compensation, a hectare per hectare compensation for any wetlands lost elsewhere in the city?
No, we don't, Councillor.
Okay. The next thing I wanted to ask was, we heard from at least one of the delegations about the quarry water. So can you comment on the impact of quarry water? Where's that water coming from? Why do you believe it's not a factor in terms of the wetlands that we're seeing now?
Councillor, I'd like to answer that question, start to answer that question by reading the conclusions from two reports that were done that look specifically at that issue. One was the 2006 report by Robinson Consultants that was looking at the Flowing Creek Hobbs Drain issue. And they did take a look at the quarry issue there. Mr. Wesley made reference to this one. It's seven conclusions, but they're relatively quick, so if you'll indulge me. One, the original drainage area upstream of culvert number 6 has increased from approximately 75 hectares to almost 720 hectares through the diversion of flow from the Flowing Creek watershed to the Conley branch of the Hobbs Drain extension. Mr. Wesley referred to that. He is absolutely correct. That was a result of blockages along Flowing Creek. 2, historically, the lands upstream of Fluellen Road and in the vicinity of the CPR embankment had better drainage and less standing water than at present. This is evidenced by culverts in the railway embankment that are now largely submerged. Also quite true, beaver blockages along those water courses had backed water up, sometimes over top of the rail line. 3, pumped discharge from quarries in the areas do contribute to the persistent base flow that is observed along Conley Road. Base flow is the low flow in summertime, the trickle of water that you'll see in the bottom of the ditch. 4, pumping has little impact on the peak flows associated with storm events. The base flow is less than 5% of the expected annual peak flow. 5, in a number of locations, downstream channel constrictions appear to reduce the capacity of the existing culverts. That again is when a beaver dam backs water up through a culvert, the culvert has less capacity. The impact on expected development, such as the widening of Highway 7, will not have a measurable impact on flows, and then restoration of the original drainage patterns will reduce both peak flows and base flow along Conley Road. So it was a conclusion of Robinson in 2006 when they looked at that area, that pumping by the quarries was not having any significant impact on the water levels in the area. The conclusion, phase 2 of our cumulative effects study, which was done by SLR Consulting, looked specifically, we asked them to look specifically at the issue of quarry pumping. And these were their conclusions. Examination of stream hydrographs, this is water levels in streams, in comparison to precipitation events, i.e. rainfall, show a high correlation between stream levels and precipitation. Changes to water levels are commensurate with the rainfall duration and rainfall intensity as would be expected. Other effects such as seasonal conditions, wet or dry, have an influence as well. Even diurnal, daily fluctuations follow a predictable pattern and show the influence of evapotranspiration from the wetlands flanking the watercourses. All that's to say is that precipitation and evapotranspiration are really the main things driving water levels. It is very difficult to see the effect of quarry pumping events on stream levels, and indeed analysis of water volumes show that precipitation volumes far outstrips the contribution from quarries. Analysis of precipitation events shows that typically the quarries do not pump until the peak stream flow has passed. There is usually a period of sustained quarry pumping out early in the year to prepare the quarries for the construction season. However, volumes are small in comparison to normal stream flow volumes. The flow generated from the quarries does not exceed flow from precipitation and runoff events and typically has little influence on stream levels. Based on these observations, we conclude that water discharges by bedrock quarries upstream of the flow monitoring stations have little or no potential to contribute to the creation or expansion of wetlands downstream from the quarries. To summarize all of that, basically there is very little groundwater flow into those quarries. The water that accumulates in those quarries is basically the precipitation that falls on it. That's because the bedrock there is very shallow, it's very tight. The quarries typically don't start pumping until they've got enough water to make it a worthwhile thing to do. And so they don't actually start pumping when the water starts to fall, they pump afterward. So in fact, the function of the quarries actually reduces peak flows in those streams because they hold the water that normally would run off and they pump it later after the rainfall has already passed through the system. So all of the studies that have looked at this have concluded that quarries, in fact, do not have any impact on stream flows and consequently no impacts on expansion of wetlands in the area.
Okay. So, but I do think I'm hearing, it is possible, because Mr. Wesley brought it up, it is possible that there are obstructions in ditches downstream from, well, whether it's from quarries or otherwise. So what I want to make sure I understand is, if those ditches end up being cleared, what is the process if a landowner wants to have a particular property reevaluated? Does this happen on a cyclical basis every 5 or 10 years, or can someone go to the Ministry of Natural Resources and say, please reevaluate this now? What's the process if conditions do change over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years?
A property owner can at any time hire a wetland evaluator to do a reevaluation of the wetlands on their property and submit those, the results of that reevaluation to the ministry. The ministry will consider the results of the evaluation, either agree with it or disagree with it. If they agree with it, they will change the provincially significant wetland boundaries in their mapping, and then they will inform us of the changes. And then within 6 months, we are obliged to bring forward an official plan amendment to change our land use designations to conform to that.
And it's a similar process. Mr. McRae said there are unevaluated wetlands. What's the process, or how would the province look at unevaluated wetlands in terms of, and providing information to the city?
So I should address the issue that Mr. McRae raised, since you bring it up. And it also gets back to the question of why we expanded the wetland evaluation outside the boundaries of the Llewellyn Special Study Area overlay. So when we went to when we first initiated discussions with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry about the scope of the wetland reevaluation, we understood going in that they would not support limiting that reevaluation to the boundaries of that overlay area. Wetlands don't respect policy boundaries. Turtles, plants, flooding doesn't respect policy boundaries. And so the wetland evaluation system is based on ecological boundaries. So we knew they would not support limiting the reevaluation to the special study overlay. And in fact, when we met with them, they confirmed that. We did, however, ask them if we could limit the reevaluation to the boundaries of the current wetland complex. That is, we asked the question, do we need to consider wetlands that could be complexed in, so new wetlands areas? And we said we would rather not do that. Complexing in new wetlands would defeat the purpose of the Llewellyn Special Study Area process, which was to settle land use questions, not to create more of them. And so they agreed that, yes, we could actually limit that reevaluation to the current boundaries of the wetland complex. And so we gave those instructions to our consultant, and that's what happened.
Okay, thank you. I think it's a comment that I'm hoping Councillor Moffat will address in relation to his motion. I think I understand what Councillor Moffat's motion is trying to do. It just means that we wouldn't be changing the zoning right now. Because it's provincially significant wetland, that would still be protected by development, but it simplifies the process if landowners want to take that to the ministry. I guess, Councillor Moffat, I'm concerned about, couldn't the province just come in and impose zoning by order on the city? And does that put us does that provide risk for us as a city? And then the other one too is I'm concerned about, where does this leave us? We've been a 15-year process, and I'm concerned about the costs and the resources from city staff if this process gets extended any further. Not just from a cost point of view, but just this is an incredibly complex and controversial file, and beyond the hard costs, I imagine for staff it's probably a very frustrating and just from a human resources point of view, one that I think we'd all like to have wrapped up as soon as possible. So I'm hoping in Councillor Moffat's remarks he can touch on a couple of those items. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Chair. This is the second time that I was a member of ARAC and a new member of council, have dealt with a lot of trouble when it comes to the designation. Previously, a few months ago, we had the problems with people being affected by changes to the floodplain mapping. And now I realize that this has been an ongoing issue, but here we've got people who are challenging the extent of the wetlands. So, and previously, we've heard that the way that the floodplain had been mapped is through satellite, and the methods seem to be challenged by a few people. So I'm wondering, how did Dylan, what was the process or the methodology that Dylan used in order to expand these boundaries? And did they work with a wetlands evaluator, which you're recommending that people use if they're going to be challenging the findings of the report?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair. So, yes, the Dillon staff who worked on the wetland evaluation were qualified wetland evaluators. That is a requirement of the process. Dillon used a combination of aerial photography and on-the-ground evaluation, confirmation of wetlands. So typically, and their report actually outlines their methodology. You initially start with an analysis of aerial photography. It's usually spring photography so that you can see the ground, and you draw the boundaries of the wetlands as you think they are from the aerial photography. And then where you have some uncertainty about those boundaries, or where they had some uncertainty about those boundaries, they would have gone out and did go out and look at the boundaries from the ground where they had access. And the majority of property owners in this area either did not respond to our request for access or did not provide access to their properties. And so Dylan went out and did ground truthing on some of the properties where they had access and where they felt that they needed to do so. So it was a mix of air photo interpretation and on the ground verification.
So how accurate do you think this process is when you have people here challenging that they don't feel that their property, I mean, I don't want to say it's blaming the victim here if they didn't participate or they didn't know what was being asked of them, but how accurate is this when you have people challenging this right now and saying that their livelihood is at stake? They need to know that this process is, that they can rely on it.
Right. So again, through you, Mr. Chair, I am also a qualified wetland evaluator, so I've done this kind of work. The accuracy depends upon whether or not you have access to the ground or whether you're just relying upon aerial photography, and it also depends upon the type of vegetation. So the most accurate way to map the wetland boundary is through on-the-ground verification. And in that case, we're talking usually about plus or minus 5 meters or so. Every wetland evaluator will give you a slightly different opinion, but 5 meters, 15 feet or so is a pretty standard for that situation. Using aerial photography, it depends, as I said, upon the vegetation. If the topography is very rough, you often have wetlands with very clearly delineated boundaries. So a rock bluff drops into a marsh. There's no question there about where the wetland is. And that can be identified with high accuracy using aerial photography and topographic mapping. This landscape is particularly challenging because it's very undulating. And much of it is covered by dense cedar forest. So when you're looking at the boundary of a wetland on very shallow undulating topography and you can't actually see the ground through the cedar forest, aerial photography can be off by tens of meters. And so in that case, it's always preferable to, if you have access to the property, to go in and do the verification on the ground.
Okay. And do we know, in fact, that that was done? And can the people who are challenging it now, can they, if they did not have the access of the evaluators, can they make themselves available now to have that before we? Just so that it's every dot is, and every T is crossed.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Dylan, first of all, as I said, the majority of property owners did not respond to our request or didn't give us permission to go on their property. So we had to Dylan had to rely solely on aerial photography. On the properties that Dylan did have permission to go on, they did not visit all of the properties. In their judgment, they felt that they did not need to do so, and the ministry confirmed their findings. Subsequent to that, I was contacted by a number of property owners who had provided, so this is after the ministry had approved the wetland boundaries. I was contacted by a number of property owners who had given their permission, had not been contacted by Dylan, so Dylan had not done ground truthing on their property, and they were questioning the boundaries that Dylan had identified. In those cases, because we had, I felt, made a moral or ethical commitment to those particular landowners that the boundaries would be ground truthed, I went out and did the ground truthing myself. So this was after Dylan's contract had already been completed. In most cases, I agreed with Dylan's findings, but there were two areas where I disagreed, and I submitted my findings to the ministry, and the ministry adjusted the boundaries again based upon the work that I did.
That's interesting, yeah.
So it is certainly possible that a property owner could have a wetland evaluator go back on their property and find that there are differences between what is on the ground and what Dylan actually mapped from the aerial photographs.
I think, it can, I don't want to say it's hit and miss, but I think we could avoid some of the discrepancies or the arguments about, they feel that, if we can make sure that the evaluators have gone in, if you can prove that it wasn't just an aerial photo that, arbitrarily, or not, it's not arbitrary, obviously, it's based on certain, scientific, but if we could avoid some of the disputes that we're having here, if we can say, look, we were out there. I don't know where we go from here, but I would, suggest that perhaps we have to do a little bit more due diligence there, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Meehan. My question, first of all, I would like to thank all the delegates for coming out today and present to us at the committee. I'd like to thank staff as well for their due diligence and work on this file. And Councilor Gower, you're right, this is just like a Groundhog Day from 2005. Some of us been sitting around the table dealing with this file, and I can assure you it's not over yet. Question to our legal staff. So we have Councillor Moffitt's motion on the front of us and said, therefore be it resolved that Agricultural Affairs Committee recommend the Council replace Flu Island Map A to I founded in Document 2 OPA Schedule 1A, 1B, and 1C found in document and with attached replacement map. So basically, we're going back to the 2009 original. It's outside. So my understanding, this document is going to be part of the OPA, and we are in the process of developing the OPA. Now, if this motion pass, which is I presume is going to pass here and pass on council, so that means we submit the OP without the additional land designation, and then the province can decide whether to accept it or not?
Mr. Chair, there are two options open to the province.
Okay.
The first one is that the province could, if the motion is adopted and then there's an OPA adopted, then the province could appeal the official plan amendment to local planning appeal tribunal. The province has a second option open to it. The city is going through a comprehensive official plan exercise, and that will go up to the ministry sometime in 2021, and the province could simply modify the official plan to show the significant wetlands as the province believes them to be, and there is no appeal by the city or by anybody else from that, if the province were to proceed in that second fashion.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mark, for this clarification. Colleague, I would ask you, and I know Councillor Moffitt will speak for his motion, but I would ask you to support Councillor Moffitt's motion. And the reason for that, we have all along working with the scope of the study area, and now we see ourselves gone outside this scope area. And I know, again, this is not going to be the final say here, but I just hope we support that and send a message. And I have to agree with Councillor Moffitt. The province has the tendency to throw municipality in that area. I think the landfill is one prime example. They approve the EA, the service area, and all the above, and then they're asking the city to do the rezoning. And then we get residents say, well, don't rezone them. Well, already the province accept that, but then it put us in a difficult situation. So I want to thank staff for their due diligence. I want to thank the delegates again and my colleagues for their good question, and I'll turn it to Councillor Moffitt.
Thank you. I was going to ask a question of Nick, but I know you pretty much answered it. Just that notion that if a property owner wishes to have their land further evaluated, that they can do that, and they can then submit it to the MNR for their assessment. And just from that, though, if that's then the case, and the MNR recognizes that and makes a change, would we then be able to rezone that through an anomaly report rather than force the property owner to go and rezone their land?
Yes. The system we have in place is that when the ministry changes the boundaries of the provincially significant wetland, the city will initiate the official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment so that the property owner is not burdened with the costs of those applications.
All right, thanks for that. I think, you know, this has been, I mean, anyone who's paid attention to anything that I'm involved in know that I have countless challenging files that I probably take positions on that are contrary to people that I represent. That said, this has been the most challenging file I've ever dealt with because I can't seem to find a place to sit on it that really makes sense to me. And that's a bit of a challenge for me. I know that if I was a regular politician, I would just flip this and say no to it and try to get my colleagues to say no to it, or just let them not say no to it, and then I would save face. But I don't do that. And I would prefer that the province just, you know, to Councillor Gower's question, if the province wants this to be designated, freaking designate it. I don't think they would, reality. I don't think the MNR cares enough. I think they are okay to take our maps and approve them, but would they actually come out and designate lands in any municipality? I disagree. I don't think they would. And I think it kind of sets us up for being just like with the landfill. We sat here, countless residents from Carlsbad Springs, tearing us a new one, and that we don't care about their community. The province or West Carleton. The province approves something, and we're left to deal with it. And I don't care which government's in place, it's all the same. So in that regard, in order to make some decision that makes sense to me, I felt that it makes sense to go back to what residents expected. And I would agree that residents would prefer that these lands not be designated, but we went through a 10-year process. We allowed for 7 years of review. We allowed for 2 further years of further review following the mapping for landowners to be able to go out there and do their own assessments and bring them back for further evaluation. But we've heard about communication, we heard about notification. I think residents within the Fluel and Special Study Area generally knew they were within the Fluel and Special Study Area, and folks who were outside of it knew they were outside of it. So when you have a report that comes forward that all of a sudden goes beyond that, I think it makes it difficult for us to be able to defend that or to explain to residents, well, you should have known, because I don't know that they should have known, especially when you're talking about lands north of Highway 7, outside of this area quite significantly and inside an entirely different watershed. So in that regard, that's why I brought forward this. I appreciate staff's position on this. I understand where they're coming from, and and why they need to do that. Fully respect that, and I appreciate Nick Stowe and the work that you've done on this file. That goes without saying. So, but I would like to bring it back to what residents expected in the first place, as far back as 2009, align with the OMB decision to create the Fluid Island Special Study Area and to further review that and to give the opportunity for further review and then to come back to council as we are right now with the changes recommended to align with the provincial regulation. So to that end, yes, I would ask that that members of committee, and I'll ask council to do the same thing next week, to support the motion to stay within the existing boundaries of what was originally anticipated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. So on Councillor Murphy's motion, ayes and nays, please. Carry. Okay, thank you very much. On the report, carry is recommended. Thank you very much. As amended, yes. And we have no open mic. No notes of motions or for consideration at subsequent meeting. None. Inquiries. None. Other business. Adjournment. Our next meeting, folks, going to be March 5th, 2020. Thank you very much. Oh yeah. Is that for public? Oh, yes, we do have a special meeting next Tuesday at the City Hall, I believe, right? Correct. Thank you.